Guys, hello and welcome. Off Track with Hinch or Rossi. Tuesday episode and another special one. We're keeping up the interview train that we've been on the last few weeks, and we welcome to the show a longtime friend, short-time colleague, all-around good guy, master of the voice, master of the universe, NBC's own Mr. Leigh Diffey. Hello, Leigh.
Hello, little Jimmy. Hello, James. Hello, James. Great to see you. Hi, Tim.
Oh, it's weird. It's like most people don't even acknowledge Tim when they come on the show. It's I'm kind
Is
of
it
upset.
bad that I didn't know how to handle it? I was like,
yeah. It's the most awkward I've ever seen you be. Okay, we're gonna first of all, thank you so much for coming on, man. We've tried a couple times to get on the show, but you're a busy man. You have many jobs, you wear many hats, so to speak. But thrilled to get you on, and thrilled to get you on off the back of your debut for the season, at least, NASCAR broadcast in Daytona. I want to start there just because it's topical, it's top of mind, everybody wants to know about it, and then want to jump back a little bit and just get to know Diff. But recently announced as the new lead play-by-play announcer for NBC's NASCAR coverage. You got to make your first start of the season at nowhere less than Daytona, and it was a hell of a race. So tell us about the experience being running the show for NASCAR for the first time this year.
Well, it was great. I mean, it was a time check first and foremost, because I was like, well, I've called Cup before and I've called Xfinity races before, and then when I actually did the math, it was 7 years since I'd done a Cup race.
Oh, wow.
So I did Watkins Glen and Michigan in 2017. So that was kind of a reminder of how fast time flies. But it was really nice. It was just like joining a bunch of old friends again, because I've worked with the NASCAR group many times before, whether it be here in Connecticut in the studios on NASCAR America or, at the tracks calling races. So it was really nice. And, our old IndyCar producer, Renee Hatlerlid, is the NASCAR producer, and Sean Owen's the director. And then, for like me working with you, for me jumping in the booth with Jeff Burton and Steve Letarte, that was just kind of like, going back home to the NASCAR group. So that certainly helped, but I put a lot of pressure on myself to make sure that I was well prepared and ready for it. And certainly just, starting at the basics with car and number recognition and name recognition and reading a race, as you know, what we used to do together in IndyCar, and it's important. And so I was super excited. And, I put big expectations on myself to perform, because I didn't want to let the team down, right? And I wanted to do a good job for NBC and for myself and for NASCAR, and didn't lose sight of the fact that they put a lot of faith in me doing NASCAR. And so I loved it. It was a great weekend. It was a great race. The ending with Harrison Burton winning and Jeff Burton standing right beside me, it was incredibly emotional, and it was really, really special.
So, I mean, so much to cover just on this, but in those ending laps, right? I mean, you guys are kind of starting to see how the race is forming together. There's been a couple incidents, yellow flags, red flags, whatever. You're coming down to the end of it, and Harrison's now very firmly in the mix. Like, at what point did you and Jeff kind of start looking at each other across the booth like, oh my God, this might be a thing? How many laps from the end before Jeff really started losing his nerves a bit?
Well, it was when it was under caution, and I'm pointing at the SMT, the timing and scoring, and I'm going like that, and he's like, I know, like,
don't jinx it, don't jinx it.
Yeah, and then It could have, whichever way it went, it was going to be an amazing story, right? And there was a regular Xfinity Series driver in Parker Retzlaff who was there. He was the guy who ended up giving.
He was the push,
he had a nightmare night the night before in Xfinity, and was racing with Beard Motorsports. It's a very small team, and they were up there. So I mean, imagine if that came to fruition, or Kyle Busch was right there. So. But we were looking at Harrison, and just the way that it unfolded was remarkable. I always say to people, we all meet lots of people at dinner parties or out or wherever you go, and, traveling on planes and whatever, and they ask you about what we do for a job, and some people like it, some people don't, but I always say there's no better theatre than live sport. and when it gets as dramatic as it did on Saturday night, it's just so compelling, and it's great for guys like you and me to be sitting right in the middle of it.
Yeah, because go ahead, Tim.
It had to feel cool to get back into it because it's not like you've done much this summer. I mean, you only covered IndyCar races. You went to Paris to cover the Olympics. It was like you were just coming off of this break, I imagine, right?
Yeah. Well, they did give me one weekend off after Paris, and I ended up getting COVID the day I got back from Paris, so I needed a full week to get over that and recover. So it wasn't exact. Well, thankfully it was good timing because I didn't have to go to work and I'd finished the Olympics, so that was pretty good. But that did give me some extra time at home to watch tape. Going through watching the entire NASCAR season and soaking it all in and making notes. And Tim, your colleague and friend there, James, knows what it's all about, and he does a tremendous job at his homework as well. That's why he's so good on IndyCar. And if you do that work before you get on, it gives you a lot more confidence, and maybe not even confidence. It gives you more comfort to know that you're armed with the tools to call a good race, or just to feel good on the air, to tell the viewers a good story.
You talk about how live sports is kind of the best theater there is, and you've had the privilege of calling all sorts of different stuff. As Tim mentioned, whether it's IndyCar, NASCAR, sports cars, motocross, you've done track and field, you've done Winter Olympics, you've done rugby, you've done all sorts of stuff. So before we get into how you are such a jack of all trades across the sporting world, I want to go all the way back. Tell me about baby Diff. Where's he born? What did mom and dad do?
My mum's just upstairs here. My 81-year-old mum, she's visiting from Australia, so I can go and get her and bring her down. But
don't threaten me with a good time.
I was born in Brisbane, Australia, and grew up in just a regular family, just a working class family in the burbs.
What did mum and dad do?
Mum was a teacher's aide and my dad was a painter signwriter. But the motorsport thing came through my father because my grandfather raced motorcycles in Australia, and for whatever reason he wouldn't let my dad do it. I'm not sure if that was financial constraints or I'm not sure, but my dad ended up ultimately living vicariously through my brother and myself when we raced motorbikes when we were kids. And then, I never grew up dreaming about being a sports broadcaster. I went to university and have a degree in education, and I was a school teacher, PE teacher for a brief period of time. At high school, I studied agriculture. I thought I was going to be a farmer and work in maybe agricultural economics or something. And so there's always been this wide array of things. And, it was through when I stopped racing bikes, my older brother was very good. He was a national champion in Australia, and I would just go to the racetrack and support him and all my old mates that still raced. My oldest friend in life went on to be a MotoGP star. My other mate's a MotoGP world champion. We all came from Brisbane. We all raced at the same motorbike club, so I was fortunate to grow up in a really good time around some great people. And got lucky when the local motorcycle club asked me to try my hand at commentary. And I was 20 years old. I was at university, and they paid me $60 for the day of commentary. And I think I called 94 dirt track races that day, and that was the beginning.
94.
Well, they're short races, right? They're 4-lap races, so
still,
they come and they go. But yeah, it was a lot. It was a lot.
It's a lot of people to learn off the cuff when there's 94 different races happening.
So yeah.
You say you were 20 when that happened?
Yeah.
So still in school?
Still at university, yep. At Griffith University in Australia, and I was doing, a bunch of different things. I've worked in the fitness industry, in the gym scene, and prior to that, I worked on a tomato farm, and I just did everything. Like when you're at uni, you got to earn money however you can, and I was doing that, and then along came this opportunity to do commentary, and I did it, and I knew all the riders, all the guys, because that's where I came from. So that came relatively easily, or it felt natural. And then a neighbouring club, about an hour and a half up the road in Toowoomba, the birthplace of Will Power, there was this racetrack called Echo Valley, and the promoter had heard me at where I did my first call, and he said, "We'd like you to come here." And lo and behold, I didn't learn this until many, many years later. That's where Will Power did his first ever car race on dirt. And his mum was the bookkeeper for the promoter who hired me to do my second ever commentary. So
no way.
Small world.
Oh, that's too funny. That's too funny. So what were you taking in school?
I was studying teaching, so to be a school teacher, PE teacher. So and I just did that for a very brief period of time.
Like you actually did it post school. You were a teacher for a time.
Correct. Yeah, just over 2 years. I taught at a school called Ipswich Grammar School, which was a private school in Brisbane.
I feel like I would have done a lot better as a student if I had the encouragement of you like calling in things as I was doing it. Like, here he comes with the assignment. Like, I would have just, I wouldn't be doing this, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
What was a little off-putting, Tim, was that it was a school of excellence, not only in academia but sporting-wise. So there were these kids that played rugby, and it was a track and field school of excellence as well. So I had these enormous athletic kids, and I'm a short ass, right? So, and I'm here and I was about 20, I was about 22 or 23 years old, and here I am trying to discipline them, and they're 18. I'm like, you're looking up at them like this. I had to use my best bluff.
So you said you did that for about 2 years.
Yeah.
Was the next job out of teaching straight into commentary?
Well, I was doing commentary while I was still at school on weekends, and that's where it's kind of like tire fall off, tire degradation. It's that crossover point. The jobs were increasing in profile, all still public address, right? There was nothing on radio or television. It was all still PA, but the jobs were rising in profile. So I was calling Supercross in Australia, and I was calling truck racing. And then I started to do PA for what was V8 Supercars. Prior to them being called V8 Supercars, it was the Australian Touring Car Championship. So I was getting these bigger and better jobs and better paying jobs, but I was interstate, and I was having to get back to school for a Monday morning, and sometimes it was a challenge, sometimes I made it, sometimes I didn't make it, and so I had to make that decision of, well, if I'm getting this many jobs on the weekends, maybe I could make a career of it. I didn't plan it to be this way, but maybe I could. So I stopped school teaching, and I moved from Brisbane to Sydney, and had some great people help me out, like, find me a place to stay. And that was the guy who was the promoter of Supercross in Australia. He helped me with a family member for a place to stay. And then for a few months, it was pretty rough going. Like, I was doing substitute school teaching. I was doing whatever I could. I baked carrot cakes. For my gas money. Serious, true story.
Baked carrot cake. Wait, hang on a minute. Were you working at a bakery, or were you just making them at home and selling them on the side of the road kind of thing?
I literally went around. I was living in Sydney, in inner city Sydney, and I went around to the local cafe, checked out what cakes they had on offer, and gave them my best pitch and said, I can make a better carrot cake than that. What are you paying for those? Well, mine's going to be more expensive. And the guys said, well, go home and bake one and bring it back, and the staff will decide whether it's good enough or not. And the staff loved it. So the next day he's like, we need, so you do anything other than carrot cakes? And I was like, I have to think. I put bananas in the carrot cakes. And, I do a banana cake too, So he's like, well, we'll take one carrot cake, one banana cake the next morning. So I ran home and I used to put that money in a jar, and I used that for gas. And fortunately, I didn't have to do that for very long, because pretty soon after I got my first television commentary job, and then it started to pick up some momentum from there.
If somebody was interested in buying one of these carrot cakes, I
was going to say,
how would you theoretically go about this?
I feel like
I love
we
a
were
good
together
cake.
for it's Becky's favorite carrot cake. I'm shocked and upset that I'm just learning this little secret fact about. Do you still bake a good carrot cake?
I haven't baked a carrot cake in a long time, but I still could, but I haven't done it in a while.
Does Mick know you make a good carrot cake?
She does. Okay. She's tasted it. She's approved it. She gave it the thumbs up. Our boys have tried it, but it's been a long time.
That's a strong move. To do the
baking.
Yeah.
That's a great way.
It was
to
my
impress
aunt.
the girls.
It was my aunt who was a killer baker, and I took her recipe and put it to practice. It was survival, Tim. I had to.
I love that.
I
love all the all the odd jobs you got to throw together to do that.
Yeah.
So that's much better than writing a dumb kid's book. That's a much better move.
Yeah, that's not working out super well.
Not great.
What do you up on that? Like, were you up like minus $800 so far?
Similar to Alex's sports betting.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I'm up minus 2,000. So yeah, because that kind of answers, that story kind of answered a question I had, which was, did teaching stop because you were over teaching and you wanted to look for something else, or because these opportunities came to you? And so obviously it was the latter. And you say you got that first TV gig. What was that first TV gig?
It was calling the rival series to what is now V8 Supercars, and it was the 2-liter Super Tourers, which was the same formula as probably the peak of the BTCC, the British Touring Car Championship.
Yeah. Great.
You had the 2-liter Audis and BMWs and Volvos and Vauxhalls and things like that. And it was that the cars were really sophisticated, really high end, and that was a rival series to the V8 Supercars. And I got that job. You remember I said I grew up with a pretty interesting group of people. Well, hanging around with Daryl Beattie and Mick Doohan more and more. And Daryl and I have been friends since we were 5 years old. And I met Mick when I was in my teens. And just, it was all part. It was kind of like a Gold Coast sporting mafia, Gold Coast motorsports mafia, really. And through those guys, I met Paul Morris. And Paul Morris is a championship-winning driver in his own right, Bathurst-winning driver in his own right. And he, these days, is a very instrumental figure silently behind the scenes with people like Shane Van Gisbergen, Brody Kostecki, Brock Feeney. The list goes on. And Paul's kind of like that driver whisperer. He has the Norwell Motorplex in Australia, which is a driving facility. And these guys just go there and goof around. But Paul has really been like this super coach to these young guys. And fortunately, Paul and I became fast friends, and his dad was one of the owners of the Super Tourer series. Well, unbeknownst to me, once a year, Paul, whose nickname is the Dude, he used to have this big party. He used to have this big party at his place on the Gold Coast called the Dude's Acres 500, and his place was called the Dude's Ranch, and it was called the Dude's Acres 500. And you had to do all these things, like you had to do a lap of the property on a horse. You had to get off the horse at the lake. You had to get on a jet ski, do a lap of the jet ski. And then you had to go around in a 4-wheel Odyssey. Then you had to get back to the house, and you had to go down a slip and slide and then chug a beer. And then you had to do all this, and you're on the clock. Well, they got me in the front of this van. It was like an old telecom van, and they drilled a hole in the roof. They put like a loudspeaker on there with a microphone, and Paul was driving, and one of his mates was sitting there, and I was in the middle, and I was commentating the Dude's Acres 500 live, right? And everybody's
your
drinking
first 500.
Beer. Yeah, that was my first 500. And everybody's drinking beer and having a great time. If sporting, motorsports fans of Australia could have seen who was there, it was unbelievable. But it was a private party, and so I'm commentating it. The very next day, he rang his dad, who was one of the owners of the series, and said, "Dad, I've found our new commentator. It's Diff. You got to give Diff a try." And so I had moved to Sydney to try and propel this career opportunity. And it was right then that they gave me a chance, and I went and I was doing field reporting and what have you. And then they put me in the edit suite, made me call about 5 minutes. It was kind of like a screen test on the fly, and I got the job, and then that introduced me to Network 10 Australia, and then things took off pretty quickly.
That's so funny. Isn't that funny? I always love hearing stories of like the genesis of an opportunity, right? I mean, it's drinking with some buddies at a private party in some cool ranch where guys are doing some outrageous behavior, and that's actually what kind of started it all off. Yeah. It's like I tell people the story about how I got my first IndyCar sponsor, right? So, I had done this test with Newman Haas, and they had signed me, but we didn't have a sponsor. We had no money. Team couldn't find a sponsor. We couldn't find a sponsor, whatever. And my dad, we were going to miss St. Pete. We'd already missed the drop dead date for St. Pete. And my dad was drinking at his local pub, lamenting the situation to one of his buddies, who said, "Well, it's a long shot, but there's a guy I used to go to university with. He's done pretty well for himself. He's got a Canadian company, and he likes supporting Canadian athletes. Maybe I could introduce you." Fast forward, Sprott Asset Management was on my car for the second race of the season, all because Dad was having a beer with his buddy at the pub, talking about how everything had gone sideways and that James's career was over. So I love stories like that.
But yours got you a sponsor. Lee's meant that he had to babysit you in Townsend. So
I mean, decades later,
which is better.
Decades later, yeah. No, I still ended up on the top of that. So that was your introduction to Network 10, like you said, and that led to how much longer were you in Australia calling races before you got the first opportunity in the States? Oh, you went to England first, didn't you?
I went to England first, yeah. So that was in the mid to late 1996, and so that introduced me to the network, and I met the head of sport, which would be like, at NBC, Sam Flood. And he just said, listen, you've got the commentary. I can see that you know how to do that. He said, but you need to learn how to do TV. And they offered me a job as a freelance reporter, kind of like at the Sports Centre of Australia. It was a show called Sports Tonight. So before I knew it, I was in there. I was in Australia's biggest newsroom, and I couldn't even type. And I'm having to write stories, and I knew I could do the voiceover part. And right. I knew I could handle the editorial, but I'm sitting in the corner hacking. And again, it was just survival. And then very quickly after that, Network 10 got the rights to the V8 supercars away from Channel 7, and I was 25 years old, and they offered me that job to be the host and play-by-play, and I was working alongside Barry.
Huge.
Yeah, Barry Sheen.
Anybody that's listening that has has touched in any way the live TV world or has aspirations of doing it, the thought of someone being 25 years old with basically 2.5 years of experience at a much lower level, getting chucked onto a massive sports property on network television, that's unbelievable, man.
Yeah, and I was working alongside Barry Sheen, two-time motorcycle world champion and all-around legend and icon, and the other commentator was Mark Osler, who was Malcolm Osler of Reynard fame and BAR Formula One fame. Was his younger brother. So it was Mark, Barry, and myself were the commentators. And I did that for 97, 98, 99. So I was in Australia for 3 years. And during that period of time, through working at the network and on the show, and us being the home of motorsport, there were some opportunities to go to the UK and Europe for Formula One launches, back when F1 launches were big, fancy, big deals. And I also got to go to Le Mans, the 24 Hours of Le Mans, twice to do a documentary in successive years. And
how long is that race?
Very long. The first year, Tim, I did it. The producer didn't want me to go to sleep. He wanted the authentic, absolutely tired growth and blah blah blah. So we were up for nearly 40 hours. So that was thankfully I was young.
When you said the producer wanted that, I thought it was going to follow up with, but I told him to get Ben. But you did it. You actually pulled the full.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I think we're up for 37 or 38 hours or something like that. But
I barely woke up for this, and it's 11 a.m. my time.
But anyway, there was one of my colleagues who was an older gentleman who'd ran a very successful business in Australia, and he was media. The television stuff was just a little side hustle for him, and he just said, why don't you take a crack at this? And I said, what? What do you mean? And he said, living in the Northern Hemisphere. He said, why don't you live my dream for me? He said, you could be over here. And within 6 months, I'd moved to London in the UK. And I was very fortunate, right time, right place, and some help from some people. And I got a job with the BBC calling the World Superbike Championship. So traveling the world and living in London. And it was there was a lot of risk. I sacrificed a lot and had to put in a lot of work, but I also had a lot of good people help me as well. And I rolled the dice, pretty big. I had the great job in Australia, and I was still in my 20s, and I left it all behind to chase a bigger dream of, going to Europe.
Yeah, you bet on you, man. That's the way to do it. That's great. So you were calling World Superbike, and so you were on site for that. You traveled around with the
traveled
series?
the world, did that, and I worked with Andrew Marriott, who's a legend of motorsports television and production. Andrew had an agency in the UK, and he would do a weekly motorsport show on Sky. I'd call everything from Ford Fiestas to Formula Ford. In fact, I called the British Formula Ford festival and the championship when Danica Patrick was there. Patrick Long, Marino Franchitti, Robert Dahlgren, a lot of James Courtney from Australia. It was really like that era of Formula Ford racing. They produced Anthony Davidson. Ant was in that series. So I did that for 2 years. And then the BBC stuff, the World Superbikes, I'd go, and then when I'm back in London, I did some stuff, and then the BBC gave me a wonderful opportunity to do the World Rally Championship a couple of times as well. So, and it was all in the blind ambition and the youthful exuberance of taking over from Murray Walker when he retired from Formula One. And I just said, that's going to be my job. I know I can get it. And I had cold called Bernie Ecclestone twice, and he called me back. And when I was still living in Australia, and said, I'm going to move to the UK. I want to call Formula One for you. And he said, well, you need to talk to this guy and this guy and this guy. And nothing eventuated there. But by working at the BBC for 2 years, and it was getting closer to Murray's retirement, my producer at the BBC used to be Murray Walker's producer in Formula One when the BBC had Formula One. And it was over on a different network at the time, but he wrote this wonderful letter of recommendation. And I ended up getting down to the short list of 3. It was myself, James Allen, and Ben Edwards. And Ben and myself missed out. James Allen got the job because he was already with ITV working in the pit lane. But as the years went on, Ben ended up calling Formula One for the BBC, and I ended up calling Formula One for NBC. So all 3 of us are mates to this day, and all 3 of us ended up getting our dream of calling Formula One.
That's so funny. That's incredible. It's funny because in a backwards way, Ben is, well, a combination of you and Ben are the reasons that I got an opportunity in Formula One, because, you just by you're under your tutelage and wise ways have learned and grown and become, a better broadcaster. I learned so much from you, Diff. And those shows are what Ben was watching. And when F1 TV was looking for somebody with a North American twist, Ben was one who was like, well, hey, I know this Hinchcliffe kid from A1GP, and now he's doing some good stuff with Diff, my old buddy on NBC. Yeah. Maybe we should look at him. So that's so funny because, again, you just answered the question I was going to go for, which was when you were doing all these different things and they're giving you all these different motorsports to try. I didn't know you had done World Rally. That's awesome. Did you ever do Monaco for World Rally?
No, never Monaco. But the really exciting thing about even when I was living back in Australia at Network 10, we did the first ever, because World Rally was always packaged, it was post-produced. And at Network 10 in Australia in 1999, we did the first ever live stage out in the bush, in the Australian bush, live stage. And it was incredible. And it really resonated around the world, so much so that when it came time for Rally Great Britain, the BBC said, well, they did it in Australia, we're going to do it here. So in consecutive years, I did that. I did those live stages. Do you ever remember back in the day, he was one of the presenters on Top Gear, and then he ended up going to a rival show called, I think it was Fifth Gear or something like that.
Fifth Gear.
Tiff Needell.
Yeah.
So he's a legend. So Tiff and I called those live World Rally stages, which was a blast. It was really, really great.
Is there a form of motorsport that you haven't called yet?
Yeah, drag racing.
I was just going to say NHRA is the only thing I could think of.
I haven't done NHRA, no. But yeah, that was a lot of fun for me last weekend, just going back to Daytona, because I had called American Flat Track on the short oval there. I'd called the Daytona 200 on the big track. I called Supercross there. And of course the Rolex 24. So to actually do NASCAR at the birthplace of NASCAR, that made last weekend even more special.
I'm not sure there's anything else that races at Daytona. I mean, you have to go do like a go-kart race. It's the only other thing that races there that you haven't done.
HSR or something.
Yeah. Go to some historic 24.
I hope you're enjoying our conversation with Leigh Diffey. Stick around next week for part 2.